Welcome back to the Engineered Angler. Yep, I'm missing something. Sometimes you gotta give something up for a little bit of domestic peace. Anyway, I know I don't look quite as intelligent anymore, but that's all right. Trust me, I almost always know what I'm talking about. And what I'm talking about this week is more about vibe baits. And in fact, maybe not so much about vibe baits, but we are gonna use a real one. I got my hands on a 110 Vertrex. This is a Nomad product. It's 110 millimeters. And if you don't know what this is they call it a vibe bait. It's essentially a lipless crankbait. Most people use them in deeper water, greater than 15 feet or so. So I don't have a whole lot of use for these guys, but if I copied it and altered it, it might be more appealing for my style of fishing. So this week we're gonna go ahead and actually copy this. But the real hat trick in today's video is gonna be that I'm gonna make a silicone mold for this and using this, but using a completely different way of making the silicone mold. So as always, it's experimental. It may work, it may not work, but we'll figure it out as we go. Stick around. And if this is your first time to the channel, my name's Franco. I'm a professional engineer, a lure designer and lure maker, and an avid fisherman. And I make these videos to try to share a little bit of what I've learned and add a little bit of physics and engineering to the art of lure making, and to play around with some experiments. Let me get this thing out of the box. And this is hot chocolate, believe it or not. This is Florida, but tonight it's supposed to drop well below freezing and be drizzly, so it's likely we'll get some snow flurries, or at least some frozen rain on the ground. You can see it hangs pretty much the way mine does, so we got the weight distribution pretty close on that model. But while that one is only partially soft plastic, just the tail, this one is all soft plastic. And it's also a very elastic soft plastic. So you can see that it actually stretches quite a bit, which is a good thing because in the areas where I fish, this little tail would be gone, the first little nibble from a pinfish. So I imagine this really elastic soft plastic really helps with keeping this thing in one piece. Since it's got a harness inside, and you can see the wire going vertically between the tie-in eye and the belly hook eye, and you can see that horizontal wire, more or less horizontal, going back to the tail hook eye. That piece of wire is really subject to getting bent, and it's really easy for a good sized fish to give this a torque and bend it out of shape. Now you can bend it back, but you know how that is. It's never exactly how it was when you try to bend wire back to its original shape. So we're going to do something a little different. We're going to use a little bit of engineering know-how to reduce the possibility of our internal wire harness from being distorted. But we're getting way ahead of ourselves. All right, so the first thing we need to do is to come up with a mold box, and that's going to be what actually holds the shape of the mold itself. And this is where we begin to kind of move away from what I typically do, which I typically make the mold box out of Lego blocks. And then I put a clay bed on the bottom or inside that box, smooth it out, and then I embed the lure into the clay, making sure that it's nicely stuck about halfway in. But we can't do that with such a soft plastic lure, or at least it would be really difficult to do it. So we're going to try something a little different, and we're going to start off by making a lure box out of this thin 1/4 inch piece of wood, which used to be a yardstick from Lowe's. These things are pretty inexpensive and make for some nice working material. We'll cut the sides of the box that length, and then the width of the box is going to be 2.5 inches. All right, that should get us started. So that's going to be the shape of our box. We're going to need a base for this thing because I need to glue it down and glue it all together. So I'm going to use this piece of cardboard and we'll make it the bottom of our box. But you know what? I just realized that this is 1.5 inches, and that's going to be a little too deep. If I make it that deep, it'll just be wasting a lot of silicone, and silicone's not cheap. So I'm going to rip it down to 1 inch. So the total height of the half of the mold will be 1 inch. So I'm gluing this down as cleanly as I can, checking the square as I go along. I'm running a bead right down at the base just to make sure it's sealed, because we don't want to lose any of our silicone. So I got to move fast with this last one because it's a lot of glue. And we'll hit the inside corner. All right, that should have us. We'll let that cool off. So typically when you put a clay bed in, you're able to put in little divots that form alignment keys for the two halves of the mold. With this, it's going to be a little more tricky because my plan is to just set this lure right at the surface, and I'll do that by running wires through the body since it's soft plastic, and have those wires support the body right at the surface. As far as the tail goes, I plan to have it right at the edge so they act as vents for themselves, because this will be the most critical area to be vented, and then all the wires that I put on there should also form vents for the rest of it. Now the sprue we'll have to cut out of the mold after we've got it made. If you look at the original, you can see where their sprue was, but we're going to do it from the top. And as far as getting our alignment keys in there, we're going to have to be a little more creative. So I'm going to go ahead and mark out where I want them. And I got to remember I'm going to have to cut a sprue here, so I don't want one in the way of my sprue. So what I want to do is have 10 pieces of either pencil or dowel glued to the board and sticking up above where the surface of the actual silicone pour will be. And that'll form holes that the second half of the mold will end up pouring into. Now to form those little keys, I'm going to use some little pieces of this Teflon tubing that I had left over from a project, I think, fixing my refrigerator. You can just use pencils. If you got some pencils laying around, just cut them. They'll have to be a little longer than an inch. So I'm going to cut 1.25 inch pieces of this stuff and just glue them to the bottom of the box. All right, once I got a nice square edge on it, it's nothing to just cut it off with a razor knife. Cuts it right through. And I just got to do this 10 times. And I can take the little curve out of it pretty easily. Just by bending it, it takes the curve out pretty easily. All right, that's got 10. Put a little hot glue on it and place it down there and rinse and repeat. At this point you might be saying, well, this looks like as much work as a clay bed, and I'm not doing this to avoid making a clay bed. I'm doing this because I want to try this to see if it's going to be a good method to copy soft plastic lures, because not all soft plastic lures are rigid like this. Most all soft plastic lures are soft, pliable, have some like little legs and that kind of thing. And I think that using this method, I'm hoping, can actually end up creating a mold that actually captures all those elements of the soft plastic lure. And actually, this would be a lot easier and cleaner if I was using pencils, because pencil will be nice and straight. That looks kind of weird, but next step is to put some wires in this guy and set it in here so the wires hold it up. And I'm going to use some leader wire, and this stuff is real thin. It's 43 pound, and the diameter is 0.014 inches. And the idea is to poke the wire in right on the center line, that little seam line, and deep enough so it will support the weight of the lure. And I'm going to do that everywhere I can, knowing that I've got some spots in there that I'm not going to be able to penetrate because of the interior hardware. And I'm going to stick one right at the fork of the tail. We finally got it on there. I had to add a few extra wires. They will get glued down so nothing moves and it doesn't get floated up. And I'm just going to put a tiny little dollop of hot glue on each one of these guys. Alright guys, I hope you realize that this is purely experimental, that I've never done this before. I'm not sure it's going to work. I got a little bit of confidence that it might. So I've got it pretty nicely leveled off. This countertop isn't exactly perfect, but we need it to be as perfect as possible, because as I pour it, my goal is to have a nice level seam line across the lure. And that's not guaranteed, but we're going to do our best. And the it I'm talking about is the silicone I'm going to use to make the mold. This is BBDino stuff. I really like this stuff. It's worked really well. I've been using it for a few months now, and it sets up fast. It hasn't let me down. It's set up nicely every time I've used it so far. And the price is pretty doggone reasonable compared to a lot of the bigger brand names. Hopefully we've got enough in here to pour both halves. If not, we're going to have a little bit of difficulty getting this video out by Friday. Since I'm really going to have to be careful with the amount I mix, because I don't want to mix too much, I don't want any waste on this, I'm going to measure this really close. And we got 26 millimeters for depth and about 63 millimeters for width and 130 millimeters in length. So that gives us right at 212, 213 cubic centimeters or milliliters, and I'm going to reduce that by 10 milliliters just to make up for the little tubes and half the volume of the lure body. I'm going to err on the side of caution and only mix 200 milliliters. I did order another box of this stuff. Hopefully it'll get here tomorrow. We'll be able to pour the second half tomorrow. All right, 200 milliliters. We got a little more left in the bottles, so if we need to add more, we can. And as usual, we'll give this a really good thorough mixing because it's cold. This stuff is very viscous right now, and we don't want it to have gooey spots in it. This is actually a good time to have a vacuum chamber to be able to put this in there and just vacuum all the bubbles out before I pour it in. And in lieu of a vacuum chamber, we can get it to tap dance a little bit. And this actually works. All right, here goes nothing. All right, that's pretty doggone close. I think I'm gonna mix up another like couple of milliliters just to bring it up just another little, maybe a half a millimeter high. The temperature is absolutely plummeting outside and it's drizzling. And the governor just declared a state of emergency for North Florida. That's mostly because we really don't have any way to deal with icy roads. There are going to be a lot of knuckleheads out there who've never driven on ice, sliding off the road into the ditch, or worse yet, into somebody else. All right, that should have it. It's just a matter of waiting for tomorrow for this thing to be set up. And once it's set, we can move on to figuring out the other challenges, which is getting those little tubes out and then building a box on top of this and then pouring the next half of the mold. I love to do these kind of experiments, usually behind the scenes, so if it goes wrong, no one else has to waste their time. Well, it got cold, but it didn't freeze, luckily for us. And this thing is nicely set. I've got to figure out how to get these tubes out, and I think the best way to do it is going to be to separate the board, and I'm hoping that if I can separate it, I'll be able to pull these things out from behind. One of the concerns I have, though, is what the silicone looks on the other side of the lure. I'm a little concerned that it doesn't like this soft plastic and didn't set up right. I don't really have anything to go by. There was a little drop on the top that I think I dribbled on it by mistake, and it didn't set. I was able to just wipe it off. And if that's the case, then it's critical enough to actually kill the project. So let's hope it actually did set up on the other side. In the meantime, what I'm going to do with these wires, I'm hoping they'll work as vents. So I'm just going to cut them off right at the edge of the wood, leave them in, and then take off the glue spots. And hopefully that'll give us a nice flat spot to drop the next half of the lure box on. Unfortunately, the silicone didn't arrive for days, not till Friday, and that puts us in a real pinch to try to get this video out by Sunday. And Saturday morning, it was pretty chilly in the shop. And we got our package in yesterday afternoon, and unfortunately, I couldn't do anything with it yesterday, which kind of sucks because it's Saturday morning and I'm trying to get this video out tomorrow, Sunday. Of course, it's my own fault. I thought for sure that this was a brand new box, and I should have double checked. Had a moment of fright there because they changed the packaging. We have what we need inside. We should be ready to pour the second half of this mold as soon as this heater gets this place warmed up a little bit. You know, I don't know if most YouTube viewers understand the amount of time it takes to put one of these videos together. A 20-minute video takes me probably about 15 hours, maybe a little more, to actually just edit. Not to mention all this other stuff, the actual construction, the actual creation of the project. I'm not complaining, I really enjoy doing it, but I'm just putting it into perspective for everybody that I'm hustling, because after I shoot all this, I've got to go and edit it. And here's a little pro tip to get all those little dust particles and everything off your silicone, is to just take a piece of tape and use that to pull them off. Because the tape won't stick to the silicone, but everything else will stick to the tape. And you should be able to get it pretty nicely cleaned up pretty quickly. And that should do it. And now it's just a matter of gluing this thing down and trying not to screw up on the alignment. Alright, we'll let that cool off, and then I'll cover all the silicone with some petroleum jelly to make sure the next layer doesn't stick to it, and we'll pour our next half. And as I put in this layer of Vaseline, I gotta remind myself that we still don't know if this thing is set underneath the lure, but I'm hoping it is. So I'm making sure I'm getting under the wires that aren't attached. Then I'm going to use a smaller brush to get inside those little alignment keys. Alright, that should do it. Let's pour that second half. And before I pour it, I'm going to go ahead and level it. That's pretty close. And the real frustrating part is I really only needed an extra like 20 milliliters just to top it off. Alright, let's get it mixed up and poured. With this side, I'm going to go ahead and use the drizzle technique to coat the surface of the lure and to fill in all the divots so I can be sure there's no air bubbles. So I just take a little on my stirring stick and drizzle it in. And this allows any bubbles that actually get trapped to come out, and I can finish filling in. And then we just drizzle on top of the body to make sure there's no air bubbles trapped on that either. Now we don't need to worry about how many bubbles are actually trapped in the mix because the surface of the lure is already coated, and we don't have to worry that we'll end up with bubbles up against the body. Now The only fear I have is that the box will leak. Cross your fingers, guys. And I love it when there's absolutely no waste. Hopefully this will set up as quick as it usually does, which is like 4 hours. So when I get back to it, it might be dark and we might be working into the night. But in the meantime, I'm going to go do some editing. Check it out. Nicely set, I hope, all the way through. Let's find out. Let's see how we can pull this thing apart. I'm hoping I can cut through the glue. There we go. The silicone is sticking to the box a bit more than I'm used to, but it's coming off. All right, there it is. Let's open it up and see how we've done. Well, at least it's coming loose. Oh yeah, that's what I was afraid of. Look at that. I don't know if you can see that, but it's still a little bit gooey in there. Let's pull this guy out. See if we got the same thing on this side. Oh man, I was afraid of this. So this side is not nearly as bad. It actually has a lot more of the texture captured. I don't know if you can see that. And it's still tacky. So it's not a total disaster, but it's a semi-disaster. I don't know if it's going to show up on the camera, but you can see the sheen, and maybe you can see it on my finger, but it's basically not setting up. The tail set up fine, so I don't know if they coated it with something. Maybe I should have washed it. I thought it was going to be the simplest of projects and going to be a lot easier than actually making something from scratch, but it's turned into a little bit of a nightmare. Now, usually if I leave it alone, it'll set. But the jury is still out on that. We'll have to see in the morning if it's set up. If it did, we'll be lucky. If it didn't, then it'll be an epic fail. See you in the morning. All right, guys, it's Sunday. Early this morning I came out here and I had an idea when I was trying to go to sleep last night of putting these two sticky molds into the oven. And I've got it set to about 170 degrees Fahrenheit. And it seems to be working. I'm getting a little less tackiness here, and it's only been about 45 minutes, so I'm gonna let it go for another 45 minutes probably. And this is the worst side. You can see how smooth it is, and it actually has done much better. It's not nearly as tacky. I'm pretty happy with that. That means we can kind of salvage this. So let's talk a little bit about how I'm gonna change the internal hardware. So currently, this thing actually has some hardware inside, and you can see what they tried to do with the wire hardware is to make it strong, and they did that by doubling it up. And by doubling it up and having it together, and if they were smart, they glued it together, and this way when that wire tries to bend, these two pieces are in shear and they won't bend, or it's a lot more difficult to bend them. So what they were shooting for was strength. They were trying to make this as inflexible as possible, and they succeeded in the direction of strength that they actually planned for. Problem is, this is the way it's going to get bent, at least in my experience. We're not going to go for strength, we're going to go for flexibility. Our main vertical piece, go up with a twist, come up, have a loop, come up here, and create an eye here with a twist. And then from here, we're going to have a separate piece that links into here, onto a wire and a twisted eye, and that will come back here, go down to form the tail hook eye. And you can see we've got a pivot point right there, so the body will just sort of bend around that link. So I've already made one, and I included a little bit of extra wire. The tag end off this twist comes up and will extend out to support this whole wire triangle. This way I can put my lead weights, which are going to be split shots, crimped to that wire. And I went ahead and made a little prototype. You can see there's our link. That is the tail hook eye, and then here's the belly hook eye, and that's the tie-on eye. And this is our little support brace that we're going to put our weight on. Now I'm going to make another one, and I'm going to modify it so there's a tie-on eye on the end of this. That way I can tie onto there, and I have both a lipless crankbait and a twitch bait. So this is about as real-time a video that you're ever going to see from me. I'm going to put this video out today, probably in the next few hours, come hell or high water, whether this comes out well or not. But we're going to go ahead and cast at least one of these lures, and we're not going to get fancy with colors or anything. And we'll see if that little delicate tail comes out okay, and we'll see how well our modified wire harness works. And I'm going to use this gold stuff and cut it up in small chunks so it melts quickly in the microwave. And as usual, we'll be using our modified turkey baster as our injector to inject the soft plastic into the mold. We still got to do some modification to the mold. We've got to cut in the sprue so we can inject it and make sure all our vents are going to work. And hopefully this isn't going to be a complete fail. Now, remember, this was an experiment in mold making, not so much lure making. And while I'm pretty disappointed in that we didn't really capture all the detail from our master, but I think this is a pretty good proof of concept for this kind of mold making for soft plastic lures, using wires to make the lure rigid and then having it set on the surface and bringing the silicone up to it. If you guys experiment with this, let me know how it goes. I'm really curious to see how elaborate of soft plastic you can actually do this with. How many legs, how many fins, how many tails, that kind of thing. I'm really curious to see how far you can take this technique in copying a really elaborate soft plastic lure. In the meantime, we're going to live with what we got. All right, now I need to mark where I want the sprue, and I want it right about there. And I'm marking it with wet erase marker with the hopes that it's going to transfer when I press this one down on it. And I do have a little bit of a mark I can follow, and I'm going to go ahead and use a razor knife to cut it out. I need a big area here to create some storage volume for the hot soft plastic, and I want the sprue to be pretty small at the body itself. This is never pretty when you have to cut it this way. I really prefer to form it, but this works. And we'll do the same with this one. And that's not bad. Hopefully that'll give us a nice clean pour. And we have our hardware with our weights on it, and these are two 2.4 gram split shots. I've got the wire harness aligned. Just need to drop this bad boy in there, get all the keys to fit, put it in our mold holder, pinch it down and strap it in. All right, I've given it about 20 minutes. Hopefully it's set in there. Let's see what we end up with. All right, not too shabby. Let me go ahead and clean it up and I'll show you what it looks like. All right, definitely far from ideal. We did miss a little bit of the tail, but I think I can fix that by increasing the vent for this little fin. And as far as the little bit of wire that sticks out in the front, just pull the body back a little bit and cut it off beneath the surface. Unfortunately, our mold is kind of corrupted a little bit, and I was a little bit too much in a hurry to get this in cast. Next time, I'm going to cast a bunch of them, but I'm going to preheat this mold pretty hot, so this way I don't get any more of the shrinkage, because it did shrink a little bit in thickness. But you know what? That's fishable right there. So I'm going to leave it there. I want to thank everybody who hung with me all the way to the end here. For everybody who stuck around, here's a few of my lessons learned. Number one, make sure you got enough material. Number two, wash the blank. Make sure you scrub it down good, wash it with soap, wipe it down with alcohol before you make a mold out of it, just to be sure the silicone isn't going to freak out on you. But here's an example of our modification and how it's going to work to keep that harness on the inside from actually bending. Now, I haven't made one with the tie-on eye on the front yet, but that's next. I'm going to make the next few of them like that, and the next time you see this thing, it's going to be at the end of my line, and we'll be fishing for trout and redfish with it. And if you're interested in seeing a more traditional silicone mold making video, click on the one that's appearing on the screen right now. Thanks, guys. I'll catch you on the next one.